I've often spoken to people who drive fossil fuel cars, and one of the many barriers they see to moving across to electric is that old chestnut of, with petrol I can be in and out in 5 minutes, I don't want to spend hours waiting for my car to charge. Notwithstanding the fact that EV drivers generally don't spend hours waiting for their car to charge, this argument is now null and void. It's all thanks to the new BYD flash charging, which is already installed in thousands of places in China and which is coming to the UK this year. Hi, I'm Gary, and this is EV Musings, a podcast about renewables, electric vehicles, and things that are interesting to electric vehicle owners. On today's show, we'll be looking in more depth at BYD's ultra-flat fast flash charging and whether it's actually going to take Britain by storm, or is it just a flash in the pan? Excuse the pun.
The EV Musings podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers to find and pay for public charging with confidence.
Now, you've probably seen the videos. Kyle Connor from Outer Spec Reviews, for example, plugging a broken-down, semi-disassembled, unheated Denza car into one of the new BYD flash chargers in China and getting ridiculous charging speeds in the order of minutes from 10% to 70%. Now, this is all well and good, and nobody at this point is questioning the tech and the fact that this is possible. But today, I want to take a bit of a deeper look into this and ask the questions, what will that look like in the UK, and what impact will it have on batteries? Earlier this season, I spoke with battery electrochemist Dr. Ewan McTurk. In a long and wide-ranging discussion, we covered numerous topics in the battery space. I'll be putting out an episode later this season with his thoughts on some of the upcoming battery chemistries and what they mean for EVs and battery storage. But we briefly discussed the BYD flash charge battery. Here are his thoughts on that.
Hi Gary, I'm Dr. Ewan McTurk. I'm a consultant battery electrochemist from Plug Life Consulting, and I work on anything technical, strategic or public outreach to do with battery electrochemistry, EVs, charging infrastructure and static energy storage. And you may have seen my YouTube channel, Plug Life Television.
Indeed. We'll put a little link in the show to that as well. Now, I want to start by talking about something brand new, which I happened to see a couple of weeks ago, which is the BYD flash charging. Now, you've been on the show before. You've spoken about how EV batteries really don't like being charged quickly because of the heat aspect. Yet BYD have found some way of pushing 1.5 megawatts through one of their standard Gen 2 blade batteries. So talk to me a little bit about how you think they've been able to do that, please.
So rather than designing this incredible new ultra-fast charging battery from the cell up, they've designed it from the very components that go into that cell. It's completely re-engineered, every single aspect of it. You could not take conventional lithium-ion cells out of another EV, package them cleverly with extra cooling and so on, and expect to be able to do megawatt charging. That would cook them. So there's numerous ways that BYD has managed to achieve this. One of them is that the electrolyte has incredibly low internal resistance, low viscosity. It's got good kinetics, which allows lithium ions to traverse it between the positive and negative electrodes very easily without without a significant amount of friction. What's particularly clever though is that the anode, which is a graphite structure normally, what they've done there, I mean, when you look at conventional graphite, that is layers of graphene into which lithium ions will pigeonhole. And then when it comes to discharging the battery, they all have to kind of filter out again. The way to think about what BYD has done with the anode particles is to imagine yourself in a theatre. So you've got all of those rows of seats and you're all having to filter in from the sides and then filter back out again. What BYD has done is they've removed the floor and the ceiling, so you can basically come in from multiple different angles. And the way that they've that's kind of crudely speaking, but they've allowed this kind of universal direction of approach. And that means that you end up with much faster kinetics at the anode, which means there's a lot less heat generated, there's a lot less lag of lithium ions, trying to make their way into or out of that structure. So you don't end up with the risk of lithium plating, or at least the same risk of lithium plating that you would get with a conventional lithium-ion cell, where if you charge it too fast or at too cold a temperature, the lithium starts to plate on top of the anode's particles rather than intercalating into them. And the advantage of this is that it vastly improves safety, because if you have lithium plating, that doesn't plate evenly. It forms those branch-like growths called dendrites, and those will eventually puncture the separator, touch the cathode, the positive electrode, creating an internal short circuit, and that rapidly disassembles the cell, let's just say. So, that problem has been resolved. There's similar trickery going on at the cathode, the positive electrode, and also the solid electrolyte interface, the SEI, which is a bit of a paradoxical thing in a lithium-ion cell. It's formed by degradation within the first couple of charge-discharge cycles, and it's a layer that forms on the anode of degraded electrolyte. There's a bit of lithium consumed in there as well. But that stops further degradation from happening, or at least greatly slows it down. And if you are stupidly quickly charging a conventional lithium-ion cell, you might end up physically breaking that SEI, which then has to repair itself using more electrolyte, and you end up losing even more capacity, even more kinetics. You end up with increased internal resistance and increased heat generation and so on. Basically, they have a self-healing SEI, which doesn't end up sacrificing as much more of the electrolyte as a conventional lithium-ion cell would. So, as I say, the anode, the cathode, and the electrolyte and the solid electrolyte interface as a result of those components are all completely redesigned just for this cell. And that allows it to do stupidly quick charging and discharging. It's one of the most kind of significant changes I've seen in the architecture of a lithium-ion cell in some time.
The analogy you gave there about the theatre seats, the way I kind of looked at it and the way they explained it was, it's a little bit like trying to run through, a crowd of people who've just left the World Cup final. You're gonna bump into them, etc., etc. And each collision there, if you're an electron, each collision is causing heat. Whereas what they've managed to do is, instead of having this big mass of people coming out, they've basically got them regimented in lines, so you can actually run down between the lines. So you're getting far less collision at each interface, hence the heat aspect is being reduced. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, so they've reduced the tortuosity of the pathway that lithium ions are taking when they go between the two electrodes. So as you point out, instead of having to kind of ping-pong their way around in a kind of fairly messy kind of pattern, they are able to take the quickest, smoothest, most direct route, which of course is the path of quite literal least resistance. So yeah, exactly.
So the question then that jumps out of that is, why are they the first people to do this?
I suppose it's the cost and complexity of researching and developing this, especially when conventional EVs and charging infrastructure were really designed for, well, initially it would be like 50 kilowatts and 2C charging, so half an hour charging for a 24 kilowatt hour Nissan Leaf. Tesla came along, they were doing 120 to 150 kilowatts with the Model S, but the battery packs were about 85 to 90 kilowatt hours, so that wasn't even 2C. So actually a Tesla Model S battery is not taxed anywhere near as hard when charging as a 24 kilowatt hour Nissan Leafs. That sort of thing. And it's taken a while for battery capacities on more conventional cars to increase up towards 60 to 100 kilowatt hours. And then, the charging infrastructure has gradually improved as well, but we're still typically maxing out about 300 to 400 kilowatts on what we're seeing on the road today. There's the complexity of installing megawatt chargers that makes it cost prohibitive. But recently, batteries have enabled this because you're able to take a fairly weak but still expensive grid capacity, trickle charge a great big on-site battery, which can then dump its power through a megawatt charger into a waiting BYD or Denza car. So that's one way around it. Batteries, because they've become so cheap, have allowed faster charging of EV batteries. So you're using a battery to charge a battery. And of course, you can integrate on-site renewables, which means you've got even cheaper electricity than grid electricity, etc. So from a practicality perspective, it wasn't really worth the research and development efforts from a practical perspective to go down to that level of engineering to get that stupidly high rate of charging. But BYD, being a vertically integrated company, has taken a vertically integrated approach, and they've designed cells that are capable of this, battery packs that can support that, charging infrastructure that can support that, and EVs that use it. So that's why we're only starting to see this emerging now. Although there's also the argument that flash charging could be too quick for its own good. So if we take, for example, the other vertically integrated company out there, Tesla, and we take a new Tesla Model Y and pull up a motorway service station that also has a BYD flash charger, and then you bring your Denza Z9 GT that can do flash charging, and you go to the flash charger. So you plug the Tesla Model Y into the supercharger, and you just go and leave it. You go into the service station for a whiz and a sandwich, and you come back out to a car that's at least 80% charged and ready to go by that point. Whereas with the Denza Z9 GT, you would have to stay with the charger, because by the time you'd walked to the service station and into the gents, the car would be pretty much ready to go. You'd have to go back and move it. So it would be a bit like filling a petrol car at a service station. You would park in a regular space, go into the service station, have a whiz and a sandwich, come back, then go to the petrol pump or, the flash charger, spend an extra 5 minutes there. So there's the argument that for most people, EVs are already kind of at the sweet spot, because if they can recharge in the average time of the average dwell time of a UK motorway service station, that will suit most people. Where this makes more sense is for businesses where there's a ridiculously high mileage and a ridiculously high turnaround. But that said, those drivers will need to take a break eventually. So I'll be interested to see just how successful this is from a practicality perspective. I reckon that the likes of my Ioniq 5, which can peak at 220 kilowatts and can go from 10% to about 80% in under 20 minutes with the right charger, that's good enough for me on my motorway journeys. And in fact, it works well, because it takes me seconds to charge that car, not minutes, because it's the time to plug in and then the time to unplug once you've come back out of the service station. So I'll be happy to be proven wrong. Don't get me wrong. I've seen the Denza Z9 GT. It's a very appealing car. I think it might be my favourite car on the market just now, because it's got quite a lot of sort of 21st century Rover 800 vibes, which is absolutely my design language. The cream interior, the wood veneer, the teal colour of the one they had at the Octopus Energy Tech Summit, it was just right up my street. It activated my inner Alan Partridge, and I was very executive, wasn't it? So, yeah, I'd love that. But would I necessarily flash charge it all the time? Probably not. But hey, that's not a criticism. That's just my lived experience as a driver. I'm aware there's some people who do need faster charging because of their typically business needs. But people who say they need the car to charge in 5 minutes for typical household use, they've never driven an EV.
Yeah, totally agree. And I actually did a Substack article that pretty much said the same thing. It was released a week or two back. I'll put a link in the show notes to that. Looping back to the actual blade batteries themselves, they're LFP, I believe. Now, you've talked a lot about the chemistry in there, the various aspects of the anode and the cathode and the electrolyte, etc. But are there any downsides to what they've done?
So, breaking news, the new blade cell is not LFP, it's LMFP. So they've substituted some of the iron in lithium iron phosphate for manganese, which is also cheap and abundant and so on. Now, the advantage of that is that you boost the cell voltage. And because the overall energy contained by the battery is equal to its capacity in ampere hours multiplied by its voltage in volts, and that gives you your watt hours or your kilowatt hours. So yeah, I mean, they're using ethical materials. They're using a higher voltage setup because they've used LMFP. They've seemingly managed to get good lifespan out of it as well. It's good to see LMFP commercialized in emphatic style. We knew that it was coming, and we knew that it was probably going to be Chinese manufacturers that would be the first to use it. But we are now, we're not quite at the same energy density as NMC, but we're still able to deliver the likes of the Denzas, the Z9 GT's impressive enough range and stupidly quick charging. So one would argue that if you are a customer in Europe, and quite frankly, most other countries in the world apart from the US and Canada, do you need much more range than that in your day-to-day life? Probably not. So, especially if the charging network is there to boost it in a very short space of time, whether that's, on a conventional several hundred kilowatt charger whilst you pop into a service station, or whether it's a case of I literally need to be, in and gone as fast as possible, I'll go to a flash charger.
I want to talk a little bit about the fire risk. Now, during the BYD flash charging demo, they showed footage from the lab where they were flash charging a blade battery at 1.5 megawatts. They physically then pushed a steel spike through the middle of the charging battery, something which in an NMC battery would cause an instant short circuit, fire, and very nasty things. Not only did the blade battery not burst into flames, it actually continued charging with an almost negligible drop in performance.
Wow.
How?
Yeah, BYD are the masters of this. They were the first to demonstrate publicly anyway, conventional lithium-ion chemistry which does not even vent hot gas, let alone catch fire. I remember them doing that with the original Blade cell when it was fully charged, and it was a steel spike that was pushed through it. And I think that the temperature increased by about 5 degrees Celsius, and that was it. And the voltage gradually dropped because, of course, you've internally shorted it. But the exact means and ways that they've managed to achieve that, there will be numerous factors, but one of them is that the structure of LFP, and to an extent LMFP, oxygen is far more tightly bound to phosphorus than it is to any of the metals that you get in NMC. So, your nickel, manganese, or cobalt. So within that particular, well, it's a very different structure, NMC to LFP, but because the oxygen's more tightly bound within LFP/LMFP, it doesn't evolve should the cell be heated, for example, by rapid self-discharge, thermal runaway, etc. So it doesn't evolve anywhere near as much. And that means when you've got that triangle of fire, yes, you could have your fuel, which is your flammable electrolyte. You'd have your heat, which would be the heat being generated by this rapid discharge. But you don't have as much oxygen. So it might vent gas, but it won't be inclined to catch fire by itself. That said, there's flammable gases that would be vented. So, you don't want to kind of go up to it with a lit cigarette and go, oh God, what's going on here? That's going to spark a vapor cloud, and it's going to cause an explosion. But in terms of, being inclined to ignite itself, it's an inherently safer chemistry. And no doubt what BYD will have done is there'll be some secret sauce in that electrolyte. There will inevitably be flame retardants. There will be means of, it could well be that the separator is particularly well designed to kind of insulate against any physical penetration by a metal object. So I suspect that it's able to withstand a fairly abusive scenario, maybe stretch its insulating material down through the puncture. I would need to have a proper look at this to be sure, but I suspect it will be a combination of a Stretch Armstrong separator and, as I said, the secret sauce, the additives that companies will put into their electrolyte, which they will never publicize. But yeah, there'll be some interesting chemicals in there for sure, which will be very good at stopping violent reactions from happening by pacifying, whether it's pacifying the short, or whether it's sacrificing themselves to have a less exciting looking reaction. Let's put it that way, which also neutralizes the situation. It will likely be those combinations.
I'll see whether I've got because I recorded the whole conversation, the whole presentation, and I'm pretty sure at one point they showed, it's like a side-by-side. They've got an NMC and one of their new blades, and they pierce them both. Yep. And the NMC just, after about a second and a half, it's just black smoke everywhere. Mm-hmm. And this other one just kind of goes, so, bring it on.
Tis but a scratch. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to say about Blade and two blades before we move on?
No, just that obviously BYD has been raising the bar on conventional, well, I say conventional, on comparatively ethical nickel and cobalt-free chemistries for quite some time. They've raised it again. I believe they are the first to market LMFP, certainly in the UK. So, yeah, I'll be interested to see the long-term performance and lifespan of one of these packs if it is routinely flash-charged. For example, if you have a taxi driver who just cannot break the force of habit of treating it like a diesel car and you're filling up in the space of a few minutes rather than doing what other taxi drivers do, which is coinciding a 20-minute high-power charge with a lunch break or similar. But no, again, I'll be very interested to see this filter through to more affordable, conventional cars. But in the meantime, I cannot wait to get behind the wheel of that Denza and see what it can do.
Well, the rumour is, well, it's not a rumour, they came out and straight told us every new BYD that they produce will have the Gen 2 blades, batteries, and the ability to use the flash charging. So presumably when they update the current range, so the Seal, the Dolphin Surf, they will put those batteries in there, and you will have the option to be able to do that when it's rolled out, when the technology is rolled out in the UK. In China, I believe they've got, since January this year, they've rolled out it's either 3,000 or 6,000 chargers already. So I think your concerns about what's going to actually happen with degradation and lifespan, sooner or later we're going to find out, because they're in active use pretty much every day.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and in fact, if BYD is going to be updating the Dolphin Surf, the little car, the kind of city car with Blade 2.0, and genuine ability to do megawatt charging, or at least, high hundreds of kilowatts. That's going to be interesting because the small car market is still underserved in a couple of ways right now. One of them is range, and one of them is charging time. So we look at the new Renault Twingo that's coming out. It looks like an absolute icon. I mean, obviously, it looks very similar to the original Twingo, but with a sort of 21st century revamp. What's not to like? That will sell like hotcakes. We've seen what happened with the Renault 5. But it's a 27.5 kilowatt hour LFP battery. Nothing wrong with LFP, nothing wrong with a smaller battery because it's literally all they could fit into it. But the maximum charge speed is 50 kilowatts, which is #so2015. If there was a means by which the Twingo or the Dolphin Surfer, what have you, could deliver a beastly high charging rate, as well as at least a 200-mile range, that would be a game changer because you will have people who live in tenements in high-density areas where there's not any private charge points, like driveways and so on, and it's a free-for-all to get onto public AC charge points. So that is where I could see flash chargers being quite useful, because if you genuinely are not able to get a decent slow charge routinely, like on a driveway, like on an on-street AC charge point, the ability to quickly nip to the equivalent of your local petrol station and charge it up in 5 minutes and be on your way again. When you are a city dweller and you're generally just doing short mileage, it's not as if you've been driving that car for 150, 200 miles and need to stop anyway. That, to be fair, is a good example of where flash charging could work quite effectively. So I'll be very interested to see where the UK gets its flash chargers.
Now, I was lucky enough earlier this year to be invited, alongside friend of the podcast, Andrew Till, to attend a special demonstration of the BYD flash charging at their headquarters in Uxbridge. Here's some of the footage from that day.
The first product of Denza is Z9 GT. It's the first model for the Denza brand and also the first model capable for flash charging. We will also continue to launch the brand officially at Goodwood Festival Speed in July. You will experience more and more cars next month at Goodwood. You may also have seen that we announced our new global ambassador, Daniel Craig. So this is a video we shoot with Daniel. Have a look.
%, in 5 minutes and 20 seconds. And 90% in 7 minutes and 50 seconds. We have, after 7 minutes, almost 8 minutes, 300. So we cross the 9 minutes. We need to pay for some extra seconds because of the pickup. And boom, 97% in 9 minutes and 13 seconds.
Can you believe what you've just seen?
I can't, actually. No, it is pretty amazing. What do you think?
Well, I was sat there just watching the counter go up.
Is that the most excited you've ever been to watch a counter?
Ironically, yes.
Sad.
Yes,
Yeah, sad.
not because of what it is, but more because of what it represents.
Yeah, it represents a lot of things, I think. It represents just another thing that EVs now do. I mean, once they scale this up.
Yes.
It's something that EVs now do that petrol cars have done for ages.
It normalises it.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that don't want an EV because of the perceived time it takes to charge.
Indeed.
And I stress the perceived bit because you and I have had EVs for a long time and we know that it's not that bad.
Not at all.
You can adapt with a longer charging time. Sometimes it takes a bit of planning.
Mm-hmm.
But there are occasions when this kind of thing is really useful.
Yes.
And yeah, off the top of my head, I think of so many sales reps that I've spoken to that don't want an EV because they don't even have time to have a coffee on the road.
Probably not even going to have time to have a coffee if they've got to charge this quickly.
No, exactly. So they will love something like this. And even just people that have no home charging, they're not even near a slow charger, and they certainly don't want to go to a rapid charger and sit there looking at social media for 45 minutes while their car charges. So for them, something like this is perfect.
Now, I also want to follow up on some of the discussion I had with Ewan about showing the presentation that I watched with Diego Peresky, Director of EV Charging at BYD Group. Apologies in advance for those watching this video rather than listening. I was trying to video the whole thing, but two guys sat in front of me shortly before it began and blocked a bit of the right hand of the screen. I think you'll be able to understand the discussion, even though some of the stuff is obscured.
But before getting there, you had a sneak peek about the battery technology. And that is the enabler that enables a lot of other things. It's a snowball effect. So we're very proud of these Blade batteries. Now, this picture is a battery pack, but inside there are all these components that are shaped like blades. And why we're proud? Well, in 2020, we introduced as BYD the first generation. And the main advantage is that these batteries, they become a structural element of the car. So they're not just a lot of cylindric batteries stacked up, and they waste a lot of time and space to be installed. This is something that can be installed very easily, and it's super efficient in terms of space, and it also does other things for the car. But based on that foundation, we decided to keep on innovating because we have so many engineers. And one of the key innovation is this very challenging name that is lithium-ion high-speed channels. What are those? Well, you see in the video here, these tiny dots are electrons. Usually, when they flow through the battery, they generate heat. But what if there would be less friction between the atoms so that they can flow faster in a more efficient way? That would bring less heat. And less heat means more efficiency in the energy injection. Very complicated? It means we can charge faster. So a conventional battery, there is one number that defines. A conventional battery for a car can typically charge at a rate that is between 1 and 2 times its own capacity. Translated, a 100 kilowatt hour battery can charge between 100 and 200 kilowatt. We can reach 5 times that. We can get to 1,000. But this is possible also because of another element, that is the heat management. As I mentioned, the Blade batteries, they have a completely different shape because they're shaped like long blades. And you will see in the animation, you see these are all the blades, and there's a very efficient cooling system that makes sure that the heat, because we generate heat when we inject or when we discharge electricity, is being dissipated in an ideal way. Due to that, the aging of the battery is reduced significantly. Again, complicated, but it means that you can fast charge as much as you want, and you will not see any significant degradation in the performance. And if you have ever charged in winter, you know that you need to condition the battery. You need preconditioning. This system is always preconditioned. The car always keeps the battery at the ideal temperature. But the value of that will come up later. Last but not least, safety. As Bono mentioned, we are super strict with safety because we inject so much energy, we use so much energy in this system, we need to make sure that the system is literally bulletproof. So what's better than piercing the battery themselves? This is not something we do for fun, it's one of the many tests that are required by the standards. And this is an example of a battery that is being flash charged, so there is a lot of energy that is being injected into it, and we are damaging it, piercing it, and nothing happened. No thermal runaway. You might have seen a lot of videos of electric cars set on fire with big fires that are difficult to extinguish. This is not happening. And this is due to the very extensive knowledge that BYD had in battery technology.
So what did we learn? Well, it's important to understand that the flash charging technology, whilst revolutionary, is not bleeding edge tech. It's battery storage, a specific LFP battery chemistry, and some good software. Lots of companies have produced rapid charging hardware before. Kempower have megawatt charging available on their units, as do Alpatronic, for example. But this is CCS charging, reaching 1.5 megawatt peak speed. And the reason this works so well is that, much like the Tesla ecosystem, it relies on having BYD Gen 2 Blade batteries attached to a BYD flash charging station, attached to a BYD battery storage unit made from BYD Gen 2 Blade batteries. You will be able to use this BYD flash charging hardware with any CCS-equipped EV in the UK, but it won't alter your charge curve if your car isn't equipped with a BYD Gen 2 blade batteries. Now, if you hook up your i3 with a max charge speed of 49 kilowatts, guess what? You'll only charge at 49 kilowatts. The good news is that all new models of BYD coming out of China will be equipped with this tech. That includes new versions of existing cars such as the Seal, the Dolphin, and the Dolphin Surf. But here's the question that's still outstanding in my mind. How are these going to be rolled out? On the morning of the day I went to Uxbridge, the session was devoted to charge point operators. They were there to see how this would fit into their sites. BYD themselves will be finding sites to roll out this technology in the UK. Primarily, these BYD-owned sites will be dealerships. The intent will be to use them as demonstrators to show customers, hey, you wanted a Porsche Taycan? Fine, but let me show you what you can get instead and how the charging is similar to refilling at a petrol station. They may end up with their own public charging hubs. I'm not sure, and I don't even know if they know. Their deployment manager has been set a target of 300 sites in the UK by the end of next year, but there's no indication of how that's split. But there will also be the issue of how this will interact with the current charge point operators. BYD have told me that they won't sell the chargers to CPOs. They'll lease them out and maintain control of them. Now, just a bit of background. BYD in China is considered a CPO because, as a general rule, anyone with a BYD or a Denza or a Yangwang or any one of the sub-brands of BYD will generally charge at a unit owned by BYD. The concept of a pure play CPO doesn't really exist in China. It's a bit like how Tesla do it. Since January of this year, BYD have rolled out 6,000 flash chargers in China. They want 3,000 in Europe and 300 in the UK. So let's take Osprey Charging as an example. Will they take these chargers? Possibly. They were definitely at the demo day, and they had discussions with Stella, the head of BYD, while there. But how will these be rolled out for Osprey Charging? Will they replace a couple of chargers at each of their larger sites, Paisley Pear or Strawberry Fields in Devon, for example, with a couple of BYD flash chargers? Or will they create a new site that just has BYD flash chargers? Remember, any CCS-equipped vehicle can use them. Or will they add one or two of these to brand new installs going forward? Now, time will tell, obviously, but I can see issues with rolling these out as people do what I mentioned earlier, which is roll up ready to use these flash chargers they've heard so much about, only to find that they're no faster on the Vauxhall Corsa E than any other charger in the UK. Now, that's a lot of education needed to get that message across.
The EV Musings podcast is sponsored by ZapMap, the go-to app for EV drivers to find and pay for public charging with confidence. ZapMap is free to download and use, with thousands of public charge points to choose from, live pricing and availability information, and a range of filters to find the right charge for you. Plus, choose subscription models for enhanced features such as using ZapMap in-car, on CarPlay or Android Auto, and discounted charging across thousands of charge points.
I hope you enjoyed listening to today's show. It was put together this week with the help of Dr. Ewan McTurk from Plug Life Consulting, Diego Peresky and Bono G from BYD, and Mr. EV Andrew Till. Many thanks for their help. If you have any thoughts, comments, criticisms, or other general messages to pass on to me, I can be reached at info@evmusings.com. On the socials, I'm on Blue Sky at evmusings.bsky.social. I'm also on Instagram at evmusings, where I post short videos and podcast extracts regularly. Why not follow me there? Many thanks to everyone who supports me through Patreon on a monthly basis and through coffee.com on an ad hoc one. Regular listeners will know about my 2 ebooks, So You've Gone Electric and So You've Gone Renewable. They're 99p each or equivalent, and you can get them on Amazon. Check out the links in the show notes for more information, as well as a link to my regular EV Musings newsletter and associated articles. Now, my stats show that a lot of people watch this on YouTube, but they're not subscribers. So if you're one of those, why not hit that button and the notification bell so you don't miss out. Thank you very much. If you've reached this part of the podcast and are still listening, thank you. Why not let me know you've got to this point by tweeting me, by messaging me at musingsev.bsky.social with the words Saviour of the Universe. Hashtag if you know, nothing else. And thanks, as always, to my co-founder, Simon. You know, he's starting to slow down a bit nowadays. Might even be looking for a different sort of career path. Radio DJ, perhaps. A day with hospital radio sparked the idea, I believe.
It's just right up my street. It activated my inner Alan Partridge.
Thanks for listening. Bye-bye now.